Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Greetings to all distinguished audience. My name is Risa Rumenta Simanjuntak, and on behalf of my former student and colleague Dennis Agustinus, I would like to present our research entitled Racial Stereotype and African American Resistance Against the Authority and Straight Outta Compton by Felix Gary Gray. Let's first take a look at the background and the research. As we know, discrimination and stereotypes happened a lot in history, and previous studies also reported that discrimination and stereotyping are still becoming major social issues up to this point in the world. We also learned that resistance are commonly portrayed with violence and destruction, and previous studies also reported that people being discriminated and stereotyped tended to resist toward those negatively imposed actions. So this research were aimed at finding answers for these questions. The first question that we raised was how racial discrimination and stereotyping are portrayed in the movie. The second question that we was able to answer was how resistance and the effects of the resistance are being portrayed in the movie. Previous research have reported that post-colonialism is strongly connected with cultures and societal interactions. We also notice that post-colonialism focuses upon the effect of the culture and society. Next is post-colonialism are seen in African American society, including family, and previous studies have also reported how African American family members were being discriminated in the society. Previous study also reported that this society did not treat the African American family well and tended to treat them as the other, as not one of them, but a stranger, the other. Previous studies also noticed that through critical discourse analysis, there were an imbalances of power, and there was a strong evidence of hegemony, and several of politicians' speeches, in this case, Martin Luther King's and Obama. Representation of post-colonial issues and influence on American society were also becoming major interests in previous studies, as well as hybridity and mimicry, when further analysis was conducted in the characters of the object of research. For this research, we used a movie entitled Straight Outta Compton as the focus for investigation, and the research was conducted qualitatively and with the approach or the point of view of literary analysis. Here are the steps in collecting the data for this research. The first, after selecting the movie, selection of scenes and dialogues were conducted to gain data on discrimination, stereotypes, and resistance issues or occurrence. Selected screenshots and scenes, as well as dialogues, were further collected as the main data for this research. And finally, the data were categorized for further analysis. The steps in analyzing the data can be seen in this figure, in which those data that were categorized before were further seen in two main areas, and being analyzed through the intrinsic elements that were consisting of character, characterization, and settings, as well as from the point of view of extrinsic analysis, by looking at the background of post-colonialism as well as resistance. After that, analysis of both intrinsic and extrinsic elements were combined to further see the connections between what happens in the movie and what happened on the background of the society at Compton. Conclusions were drawn after those connections were being identified and further clarified. As a result of the analysis of the data, we could see that from the point of view of characters, there were characters who were major or considered as the center of the story, and these were the African American young artists. They were rappers, and they were trying to find their ways to improve their singing career or the career in the music industry. From the point of view of setting, the movie, which was also a semi-biography, was set in Compton, California in 1986. You could see in the picture that Compton, as a setting of the movie, was pictured as a picturesque, quiet neighborhood, and look like the people there come from middle class social group of people. Looking further at the data, the study investigated whether there were evidence of post-colonialism, evidence of white discrimination towards the African American society or group of people, and it was found that there was increasing negative sentiment from the authority, represented or usually pictured in the movie as white officers, towards the young African American characters, in the sense the young rappers or the boys in the neighborhood. Throughout the movies, it was seen that a verbal communication coming from the officers or initiated by the white officers were always using a negative tone, were always in a negative sentiment toward the young African American boys or people in the movies. It could also be seen in the movie that there was police harassment towards the young African American boys, the people here, and they came from African American backgrounds, and the police officers were always pictured as directly seizing them, even brought them to the ground for no obvious reason, and simply because of um, the reason that these were needed as a caution for them not to behave badly or to do some criminal activity. So as a warning instead of the action towards a real crime. The dominance showed by the police officers towards the African American groups of young artists were also seen in all occasions. So it was not only seen as a precaution in the time when people were not supposed to roam around in the city. For example, it's the time when usually people are home taking some rest, and police said that if you are roaming about in the town, you must want to cause some problems. But these actions, these repressing behaviors were also shown during the daytime. The morning time, the daytime, when there was no obvious reasons for the officers to ask the young artists or the young people to just fall on the ground and being interrogated. Post-colonialism were also shown as an obvious action from the white police officers toward the leader of the group by calling him with a particular terminology which was very repressive. Yeah, and the way the officer also speak to the guy or speak to the man were far from polite. So this particle word was used to not only to undermine the value of the person, but also to cause reactions from the society. More in the data, the evidence of stereotyping was not only shown in the personal actions of the white officers, but more importantly or more interesting to see was that this institution was actually functioned on the basis of white supremacy. So even though the officers are of African American background or origin, the way he would talk to the young rapper or the young artists were relatively the same, in a negative tone, in an accusing tone, and not reluctantly accusing them of doing something wrong, even though the young people were not doing anything wrong. For example, all officers or these officers call them gang members. Yeah, they refuse to call them artists. They considered these young people do not have the the privilege to be called artists. Another evidence was to show that after all those actions, some resistance was shown by these young African American people. So as a reaction to what they received from the police institution, they decided to speak up and to gather together, conducted a musical performance or a gig, and this was considered as a resistance toward the post-colonialism, and it was also reflected in the lyrics. As a result, the group were banned and their performance was considered as illegal. In conclusion, the research have shown that there were racial discrimination and stereotypes in the society as shown in the movie, and it was clearly portrayed in the movie. The portrayal were not only apparent in terms of gesture or language expressions, but also in regulations or limitations of access and rights to express themselves, to express these young African American people. Such portrayals were shown by the white peasants and police force as white instigated institution towards the African American. It was also shown that resistance was shown by the African American people as communal and personal expressions rather than political campaign or gesture, and that this resistance resulted in the arrest of the African American. These are the references that we use in our. Thank you very much for your attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.